Old Cairo is a very special part of Cairo, and it was built around the fortress of Babylon. It dates back to Roman era, which is around the year 29 BC. This was when the Romans invaded Egypt, and Egypt became part of the Roman Empire that ended the Greek era, and with it ended Egypt the Great. It became a small province, mostly insignificant within the Roman Empire. Yet this was the settlement for the early Christians and the early Jews of that era, and when Christianity started in Egypt around the year 60 AD. The Christians and the Jews settled in this area, and they built their old churches and their old their old synagogues. At that time, all cities in Egypt were mostly cosmopolitan. They were a mixture between the natives, the ancient Egyptians, the Jews, and the ruling class, which were the Romans back then. The area remained as typical as it was. It hadn't changed much until the Arab conquest of Egypt in the year 641 AD. The Arabs mingled with the Egyptians, whether the Christians or the Jews, and that is why when we look back to this era and we look back to the area, we do not find a distinct place that says that this area people look different or they're dressed different, because Egyptians and Arabs intermingled along the centuries. But this remains a very special part, because I believe this is the highlighted part of Cairo where the three religions coexist: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Although I worked as a tour guide for over 20 years, this area still gives me the chills, because this is how Egypt looks like. This is the Egypt that I know, where people coexisted for hundreds of years, for decades. The very significant historical sites there: the Hanging Church, the Ben Ezra Synagogue, which is the oldest still active synagogue in the world. It's the oldest that still lasts and where rituals take place, and of course the oldest mosque in Africa, not only in Egypt, which is the Mosque of Amr ibn al-As. It's amazing that the houses in the area look exactly like they were when the area was built. The small alleys, the very tiny roads, forming a network where houses with very small houses of people who lived for centuries, generation after the other, living in that same house. If you happen to go to Old Cairo, you should not overlook the old doors of the houses. Some date back to the 4th and 5th centuries, as old as that. And some things in Egypt just don't change. The area has been, although it has become a remarkable attraction for tourists, but still typically it has not changed much. The area where the historical sites are, we call it more or less now, it's more like slums, but the area of Old Cairo in general, it's not slums, but we can say that it is lower middle class residential area. The features have changed on the outside, but in the inner alleys it remains very much the same.